So I started hammering out these sterling silver feathers, which I make, and then I thought the feathers could also be cuffs. And then I kept going with my initial love of forming metal, and I fold metal and I turn that into cuffs, and then I weave belts. And the necklace I'm wearing is a homage to Calder's work. He worked a lot with the spiral, just taking really thick pieces of brass and wire and hammering jewelry.
Think of the people you interact with every day. Would you want to spend a day in a canoe with them? Hi, I'm Nathan Mercero, CEO of Planning Alternatives. We're a disruptive brand in the financial planning space with a point of view that true wealth has nothing to do with money. Growing up in a small town in Canada, I experienced examples of families with money and without. It started me on this journey of understanding wealth and the idea that spending a day in a canoe with someone could be one of the best investments you could make. Join me as I sit down with leaders, entrepreneurs, creatives, rule breakers, and friends to discover their perspective of true wealth. And maybe you'll start to shift yours.
I'm delighted today to be joined by Chrissy Glenn. And Chrissy, it's great to meet you here at the Western Design Conference. And
Really?
thank you for taking time to stop by the Day in a Canoe podcast. Would you mind telling listeners what your focus is with your medium and your art, and what some of the inspiration points around when you're creating these beautiful works?
Yeah, absolutely. It's nice to meet you as well. Thanks so much for having me on. I would say my inspiration is primarily drawn from nature. But when I was young, when I was a teenager, I had the opportunity to apprentice with Harry Bertoia's son, Val Bertoia, who is an incredibly talented sculptor in his own right. And his father's work was drawn a lot from nature. I grew up in the countryside of Pennsylvania, and I find that there's beauty all around us if we take the time to look at it. And I've spent plenty of time living in cities, but being in the countryside is where I really find my peace and the recharge of my batteries. So a lot of my inspiration comes from there.
What led you to the medium of metal and being a metal sculptress?
Doing that small apprenticeship with Val exposed me to the opportunity to work with metal. He's a metal sculptor. But I also realized fairly early on that I could take a piece of metal and visualize what I wanted it to be and then figure out how to get there. I had wanted at one point to become a farrier. So I have these two great vintage anvils. One is a farrier's anvil that dates back to the turn of the century, and the other one is a British anvil that was made in the 20s. And they're both very different, but I do all my work basically on those anvils. I hammer everything by hand. I don't cast anything. So everything is handmade. All the rivets, all the pieces are cut out. They're all hammered on anvils. They're heated.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So what's it like beside the hammering part, like working with metal? It's such a unique medium. What's the challenges? Where do you find flow when you're in the zone of creating it?
I think that the biggest challenge for me is if I want to make a piece like the pedestal piece that I produced for the Western Design Conference this year, the big variation on the squash blossom with the arrowheads and the dragonfly wings from the Isleta dragonfly nation. And then there's a little Alexander Calder thrown in there with that piece because I wanted it to have a very mobile quality to it. And my biggest question to myself was what will the connectors look like? I wanted them to be integral to the piece, but not take away from it and yet still be functional. And so I went through several different variations on those until I figured out exactly how to make that all work.
And do you find that you build prototypes, have to hit the reset button, start them over? What's the process? Because it seems to be a pretty complex
Yeah.
process.
What I'll usually do is I'll visualize what I would like to produce in my mind. And then I'll do a few sketches, just really basic sketches. And I'll start by creating the elements first. And yeah, when it comes to things like how to put it together or like making a belt. And then I just went through this recently. I weave sterling belts and it's all one piece connected to the buckle. So I got that whole process done. And then I was like, okay, how is this going to stay? Like, how do I prevent this from just flying open and off of someone as they're moving around? And I came up with this little ingenious idea of a clip that just slides in and holds itself on the buckle, but that took some time to come up with. Yeah.
Back to your artist journey, when did you know that metal was for you?
I would say that when I did so my senior year in high school, I took some open studio classes at Kutztown University. That was actually probably a very large turning point for me in my life because at the time, Kutztown had this fabulous art program called the New Arts Program. It was run by a professor named James Carroll, and he brought in all these different artists from New York and all over the place. So I had the opportunity to meet John Zorn and Philip Glass, and then, funnily enough, I was representing the artist and singer Joni Mitchell at the Galway Arts Festival, and he was there performing, and I was on the same train with him to Dublin, and I just went over and I said, "I have to just say hello," and I mentioned the New Arts Program, and it was like this, wow, back travel. It was so many years ago, but I in one of those open studio classes, to answer your question, I had the opportunity to work with their metal studio, and it was pretty basic, but they had oxyacetylene torch and some cool things to play around with, and that was probably when I realized that I had a gift for working with metal. And then I had a great, artist from New York. I wish I could think of his name off the top of my head, but I can't right now. You could sign up to have them come in and critique what you were doing, and he said to me, "Wow, this is you should keep going with this." And I did, but not right away. That's a story as well.
So tell me about that story because many artists have the journey that have either highs or lows or pivotal moments that were more defining in their journey. What has that meant for you?
Oh, absolutely. I went to Moore College of Art and Design and Philadelphia College of Textile and Science, which I think is a different name now. And I studied design, I studied art, I studied textiles. But when I graduated, I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do, so I took a studio in an old warehouse space on Chestnut Street in Philadelphia, and I set up a studio, and I was waitressing, and I had the opportunity to move to London, and I took that opportunity. And when I was there, I was exposed to the whole young British art scene, which I took in as much as I could. And there I started a little curatorial work. I was there for maybe 2 years, and then I moved back to New York. And being a country girl, I was living in the city, but really missing the countryside. I bought a little house right on the main street in a town called Stone Ridge, New York. And I kept meeting all these really amazing artists up there. And I thought, well, you know what? We only have one gallery here. And it's not even in this town, it's 20 minutes away. You had galleries in Woodstock, but then there was just one other gallery in Kingston. So I decided to open an art gallery and curate exhibitions. And I really did that for quite a long time. And then what was so wonderful about it was that I love meeting people. So I had the opportunity to meet artists and be inspired by them. One of them in particular, I'm going to mention her. She's deceased now, but her name was Gillian Jagger. She was the daughter of Charles Sargent Jagger, who was the British artist who made the war memorials in Hyde Park in London. And she had a farm up there with her partner. And when she was 82, she cast her horse pasture in plaster. And I thought to myself, I want to be just like this lady when I'm 82.
Inspired.
Such an inspiration. Yeah, so I ran the gallery, got married, bought a farmhouse, renovated it, had a child, And then when I turned 50, I decided that I really wanted to move to the West. And so my husband and I, we sold our farm and we put it on the market and we came out west to look for a property. And at that point, I left all the curatorial and design work that I was doing in homes and office buildings in Manhattan and things like that because I was weaving metal on a small scale. If it was somebody would come to me and say, "Can you do a custom piece for me? I want my wall covered in copper," I would weave that for them because I integrated the textiles into the metalwork.
It's amazing.
Yeah. And then would you like me to talk about my journey? I say absolutely. So we spent 5 weeks on the road and we found this ranch that we fell in love with outside of Cody, Wyoming. It's on the Upper South Fork in the Shoshone National Forest. And when I moved out here, I thought to myself, maybe this will finally be my opportunity to just focus on my own work, my own metal work, and not be representing other people's works because I think running a gallery and being a curator, you don't understand how time consuming it is to have your stable of artists and really properly represent everything that they do and do them justice and make sure you're getting the press for them and you're putting your shows together and you're finding clients for them. You really do not have time to do your own work. Yeah.
To build business models.
Yeah, you just did. Yeah. And I would make pieces, but primarily for myself or as a gift for a friend. Or, like I said, if somebody came to me and said, I want this architectural piece in my home or my office, but it was never my focus. And so we came out here. This is a cute story. I met a hatter who's actually also at the Western Design Conference. His name is Darren James. He goes by D. James. Met him at Chico, and he was apprenticing with a master hatter by the name of Rich Rand, had owned a hat shop in Billings for 40 some years and still does one-off work, also in Billings. And Darren was just starting off, so I love hats. I went out to have a look at what he was doing. I ordered a hat from him, and he called me a couple months later to tell me it was completed. But he had moved from being downtown into Rich Rand's warehouse. I had walked in to pick up my work, and I was so excited. Darren made me a beautiful hat, and I asked if I could meet with Rich, and he said sure. And I was wearing this woven belt, and he complimented that it was a beautiful piece. And I said, thank you, I made it. And then he stood there looking at it. And I said, are you wondering if I can make that finer, like a hat band? And so he said, yes, ma'am. That's one of the things I love about the West, it's just very different from the East. But I did. I ran with that and I started weaving really small pieces like the hat band I have on.
Yeah, your hat's beautiful. The band's beautiful.
Thank you. And then I thought, what else can I do? What else would be beautiful as an accoutrement for your hat? So I started hammering out these sterling silver feathers, which I make. And then I thought the feathers could also be cuffs. And then I kept going with my initial love of forming metal and I fold metal and I turn that into cuffs. And then I weave belts. And the necklace I'm wearing is a homage to Calder's work. He worked a lot with the spiral, just taking really thick pieces of brass and wire and hammering jewelry. Harry Bertoia also made jewelry. I feel like a lot of really great sculptors dabbled in jewelry and they had fun with it. It was just like a little, I don't know what it was for them, but they definitely did it. I saw the retrospective of Calder's jewelry in New York at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I went to it 4 times because I was so inspired by the way he put his pieces together. He would hinge his necklaces like his mobiles. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, really interesting. So
As you look back on your journey, what advice would you give a 20-year-old self?
I think it's interesting because I recently had this conversation with my nephew. I feel like when you're a young person, there's so much pressure on you to decide what it is you want to do. I have to decide what I'm going to do and I'm going to pay all this money to go to college and I want to use my degree. But I feel the advice I gave to him and looking back on it, it's don't put so much pressure on yourself. Find something that you really love and try to at least head in that direction. and say, I love doing this. I'm going to do it if I can, or at least go in that direction and then get my foot in the door somewhere. And if it's not exactly what I want to do, you can always reinvent yourself. I really do believe that. We're human, right? And we're not locked into a box. We evolve, hopefully, just like every other species does. And so it's a beautiful thing if you can find new ways to express yourself and make your dreams become a reality through hard work. It's a lot of hard work and dedication. And being an artist is being a self motivator. You have to be your own boss and make yourself get up in the morning and accomplish everything that it is that you need to do. But that would be some advice, I think.
And as you think about your future and evolving, what do you see ahead?
We're in the process of building a ranch house, an architectural one. So that's really exciting, and it'll be a creative process for me. And I hope to work with other artists on the house. I'd like to scale my work up again. That's something I'd love to do. I When I had my son, I stopped weaving 70-foot sculptures to hang in trees and went down to much smaller pieces because little children take time. And I was so grateful to have my child. I love my son. But now that he's getting older, I would like to definitely look more at that and go in that direction and perhaps do some larger pieces and have my own gallery show. And not in my gallery, in someone else's.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's good inspiration.
Yeah.
Chrissy, I want to thank you for sharing your story. You have so many highlights. Your work is beautiful, and want to wish you all the best for the next chapter of your evolution.
Thank you so much, Nathan. This was really a pleasure.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review. To discover what wealth means to you, please take our assessment at planningalt.com.